Welcome to a discussion on what's left of the election. My name is Ty Moore.
I'm Philip Locker.
What we're going to talk about today is with 3 weeks left in the election, we have a pretty bleak situation from the point of view of most people on the left. It's very possible Donald Trump could retake the White House, which is a damning indictment of the last 4 years of the Democratic Party's leadership. And on the other hand, the Harris campaign has in recent weeks moved increasingly to the right, embracing the endorsements of Liz and Dick Cheney, fully funding the Netanyahus, increasing escalation and genocide in Gaza and around the Middle East, generally trying to tack toward winning Republican voters at risk of alienating more and more people on the left. So our topic today, though, is how should the socialist left, the labor movement, engage with this election season. There's debates within DSA, within the labor movement, within the wider left, of how we can use this challenging moment, but also this moment of heightened politicization of millions and millions of working class people. How can we use this moment to further advance socialist consciousness, to advance the idea of independent working class politics? So what's left of this election? There's two main positions on the left. The largest, most influential position of this camp is represented by Shan Fain, Bernie Sanders, AOC. They offer political support to Harris. They basically are silent about their criticisms of Biden-Harris administration on Gaza, on immigration, and actively promoting illusions that Harris, Biden are friends of working class people. Then there's the radical left, a much smaller but very vocal minority who is correctly rejecting this strategy of covering up for the corporate politicians that lead the Democratic Party, and instead supporting figures like Jill Stein, but often doing this in a very alienating, self-defeating, self-isolating way. We're going to discuss both of these two approaches and how they are helping or hurting the central task we have in this moment of a heightened political debate. And we're going to be putting forward our own position. Spoiler alert, we have fundamental strategic disagreements with the approach of most progressive leaders who are uncritically endorsing Harris and the Democratic Party leadership. And we also have serious tactical disagreements with most of those on the revolutionary left, including Stein's campaign, who have taken a generally dismissive approach about the unique threat that Trump represents. So let's start with the dominant position of progressive leaders on the moderate wing of DSA. Do you want to take it away, Philip?
Sure. I agree with one central premise of their position, the obvious reality that Trump and his MAGA movement represents a very serious threat, and in reality a greater threat than Kamala Harris, a greater threat to working people and to the left. He's running on a promise, a clear promise of carrying out the largest mass deportation in U.S. history to deport millions. He's running on an open agenda of attacking unions and workers. Just listen to his sort of banter with Elon Musk about firing striking workers. He represents a real threat to the LGBTQ community, especially trans folks, and particularly on the issue of abortion. There's a clear-cut difference where Trump and the Republicans will go on the offensive against abortion rights, and Democrats, while not putting forward the program that we need, far from being adequate, at least will not go along with those, are not pushing for those kind of attacks, and are defending in their own way abortion rights. So I think it's clear that the conditions for working class struggle will be more favorable under a Harris administration than a Trump administration. But what I think is essential, you can make all those points, and it's legitimate for Bernie Sanders and AOC and the labor leaders to make those points on the condition that they are prepared, that they are honest and clear with their base, with working class people, that Kamala Harris and the Democratic Party in no way are on our side. They're on the other side of the barricades. They represent big business. They represent corporate America. They are the managers and stewards for U.S. imperialism, as we see with this atrocious enabling of Netanyahu's massacre in Gaza. and that they are openly prepared to criticize and, where needed, wage an open struggle against a Harris administration rather than what we've seen too much under Biden, rather than covering up for their pro-capitalist agenda. And I have to say, while they make those legitimate larger points, they are fundamentally not doing that. They're fundamentally not educating their base about the reality of the Democratic Party. They're using the greater threat of Trump to hide the reality of Kamala Harris.
Let's play this clip of Shan Fain speaking at the Democratic National Convention to give an example of what you're saying.
Kamala Harris is one of us. She's a fighter for the working class. And Donald Trump is a scab. We need a defender of the working class in the White House, someone who is one of us and someone who knows how to fight. And that fighter is the next president of the United States, Kamala Harris.
Well, I'll start by just saying, I absolutely celebrated, along with most of the left, when Shan Fain was elected president of the UAW and went on almost immediately to lead the historic strike of the big three automakers, winning, unprecedented gains. It was an example of class struggle unionism. He's brought a lot of left-wing and socialist thinkers into the leadership of UAW along with him, and it's a powerful example for the rest of the labor movement. And I think there's a lot of good things to say about Shan Fain, and I look forward to the fights that he will lead in the future. But I think he is fundamentally mistaken in his approach to this election. He does his members and the working class as a whole no service, as you said, by promoting positive illusions that Harris is going to be their best friend, that Biden has been the best president for working class people, in history. I think it is significant that Biden walked the picket line with UAW strikers. That's nothing to sneeze at. But that reflects the pressure from below. That reflects the growing anger of working class people and the ability of his union and the labor movement to channelize that. That's a pressure that's been put on the Biden administration, especially after he sold the railroad workers down the river and there was massive outrage. And I think we need to stoke that outrage. We need to offer warnings to working class people that a Harris administration funded by Wall Street, funded by hedge funds, funded by Silicon Valley, is going to be fundamentally, when it comes down to it, the ally of big business, not the ally of working class people. She's going to continue the policies of U.S. imperialism in the Middle East and around the world, just like Biden has. And we need to prepare people now, not promote these positive illusions in these characters. What do you think?
I love Shan Fain calling out Donald Trump as a scab. That's the kind of class war message that we need. But what's in contrast, where's the class struggle? Where's the class war when he's talking about the representative of the hedge funds, of Wall Street,
right,
of Walmart, Kamala Harris? It's not class struggle, it's class collaboration to say that she is our champion, our enemy is our champion. And that's, I think, what's exciting about Shan Fain was that he brought that message of class struggle, but it's not enough just to do it on the industrial plane. The labor movement needs to be armed with a class struggle approach on the political plane as well.
And I think one of the main reasons, obviously, that so many progressive leaders in general, so obviously it's not just Shan Fain, are gushing over Harris and Biden when they, I'm sure in private conversations, they have a lot of criticism. They probably share many of our points, but they're not putting these forward publicly because they think, well, look, we have fascism as the other option. And somehow by shutting up about criticisms of Harris, that will help her get elected and therefore stop fascism. And I think that misses a fundamental point, that the Democratic Party, the neoliberal policies that Obama, in the aftermath of the Wall Street crash, over 10 years ago, has been continued by the corporate Democrats in Congress, the Biden administration, et cetera, that they have paved the way for Trump. The Tea Party and now the MAGA movement have been born out of a rejection of these free trade deals, out of a rejection of neoliberalism, about the hollowing out of the American working class that from the Clinton administration on has been the hallmark set of policies, yes, of both parties, but the Democratic Party, absolutely. And Trump has led a revolt against that, a right populist revolt, pointing in the completely wrong and dead-end directions of attacking immigrants and what have you as the solution. But unless the left, puts a clear marker down and says, we take no responsibility for the corporate leadership of the Democratic Party. We are not of them. We are not part of that. We represent something fundamentally different. And Bernie Sanders' 2 campaigns gave a glimpse of what was possible. If a politics like that could be developed, I think that would be the fundamental. That's the way to fight the far right. Whether Trump is a fascist or not, we can debate that. But however we move forward with this, we need to build independent working class politics, and that's not what Shan Fain is doing. But what
I think Trump is extremely dangerous. I think fascism is exaggerated, but he is a real danger, a real threat, a greater evil. But even if it was fascism, the conclusion is completely mistaken. Fascism justifies a united front to fight together with other forces in a common struggle against the immediate right-wing danger. But it doesn't mean to hide our political differences. Even if we had to block together with liberal forces against a fascist threat, we should do that with our own independent message, with our own criticisms of those liberal forces for all the reasons you said. Because at the end of the day, we might prefer the slower poison of Kamala Harris over the immediate death sentence of Donald Trump. But we know that the poison of Kamala Harris and the Democrats prepare the ground for discontent and disillusionment, and right-wing populist forces will grow. So if we want to defeat Trump and right-wing populism, we have to displace the liberal establishment with a working class force to be the main opponent to right-wing corporate interests, and not cede that ground to liberal politics.
I think that's a good transition to talking about what is the far left doing in contrast and how do we relate to that. So let's cue up the clip here of AOC criticizing Jill Stein, and we'll hear Jill Stein's response as well.
What I have a problem with is the fact that if you are running for president, you are the de facto leader of your party. And first of all, trust me on this. I run as a third-party candidate in New York. I'm also run as a Working Families Party candidate in addition to running as a Democrat. Because trust me, I've been on record about my criticisms of a two-party system. So this is not about that. But you are the leader of your party. And if you run for years and years and years and years and years in a row, and your party has not grown, and you don't add city council seats, and you don't add down ballot candidates, and you don't add state electeds, that's bad leadership. And that to me is what's upsetting. Because if you have been your party's nominee for 12 years in a row, 4 years ago and 4 years before that and 4 years before that, and you cannot grow your movement pretty much at all, and can't pursue any successful strategy, and all you do is show up once every 4 years to speak to people who are justifiably pissed off, but you're just showing up once every 4 years to do that, you're not serious. You're not to me, it does not read as authentic. It reads as predatory. I'm sorry. I'm just saying it. Because as a person, I endorse Working Families Party candidates. I endorse DSA candidates. I take risks, and I endorse even in primaries against Democrats when it's merited. What does this person do to grow power?
Well, we're going to just have a chance to discuss what AOC just said. A little fact check. Howie Hawkins ran for the Green Party 4 years ago. But why don't we play the clip now of Stein replying to her.
Jill here. I'm about to board, but very quickly I just wanted to thank AOC Pelosi so very much for her very authentic concern about growing green power. Clearly AOC is the attack dog du jour, and the Democrats are running scared, and they should be, because who wants to support a genocide? Who wants to vote for a genocide? And if there's anything that's predatory here, it's saying that your candidate is working tirelessly for a ceasefire when actually they are actively funding and arming genocide and actually refusing to even consider an arms embargo, which would bring the genocide to a screeching halt.
Let's just contextualize this real quick. This exchange came out after a highly publicized poll showed that I think a majority of Arab Americans in Michigan were backing Jill Stein as opposed to Harris. And it also came out, right after the AOC's speech at the convention. Stein referenced that, where she said Harris is working tirelessly for a ceasefire. Which I think is clearly not the case, or has been deeply ineffectual, and they haven't used their primary leverage, which is arms, to affect that. But why don't you kick it off? What do you think of this whole exchange?
It's really sad. It's really disgraceful for AOC, who was elected on a promise of being an insurgent, of being a rebel, of being a voice of the left, and bringing a spirit of rebellion into the halls of Congress, and using her position to build movements in the streets.
The occupation of Nancy Pelosi's office for the climate justice movement immediately after she was elected. I mean, that was an inspiring, exciting moment.
Absolutely.
But now she's praising Pelosi.
For her to use all that legitimacy and credibility that the left has invested in her, to use that to be the attack dog for the Democratic establishment, to do their dirty work, is disgraceful. That is not let them do their dirty work. We do not need left-wing fighters and representatives to be the ones trying to snuff out and suppress the healthy sentiment of rebellion that Jill Stein and young people and anti-war activists and Arab Americans voting for Jill Stein are expressing, when they're rejecting this intolerable choice between the Democratic administration, which is funding and arming Netanyahu, and Donald Trump, who promises to do that even more aggressively. That is an unacceptable choice, and our job is not to tell people lower your expectations.
I mean, I fundamentally agree with all that. I mean, I think we'll maybe get into this a little bit more, but I think AOC does have a point in that Jill Stein and the Green Party in particular has failed to effectively build a real movement. I mean, DSA has tons of problems, but I think over the last decade, it's no coincidence that DSA, which offers a much more clearly class struggle, socialist approach, that has democratic structures, that has a much broader dynamic debating culture in it, has grown, and the Green Party and independent left politics that have been developed around them has stagnated. I was active in the Green Party in the aftermath of Ralph Nader's 2000 and 2004 campaigns, which, especially in 2000, did have a real movement character to it. And the Green Party's only declined since then. And I think that does reflect a lot about their politics. And unfortunately, I think Jill Stein has, as we'll get into, reflects some of those mistakes as well.
I totally agree. I just say, though, not to let AOC off the hook when she talks about the track record of the Green Party being a failure. And I agree with your criticisms. And I say that as someone also who had a lot of sympathy and was involved in green politics around the Nader campaigns. She leaves out, what's the track record of success of the Democratic Party fighting for the working class, fighting against capitalism, fighting against U.S. imperialism? The track record is carrying out the slaughter of millions in Vietnam. The track record is voting for George Bush's disgraceful attack on Iraq. The track record is right now enabling Netanyahu's genocide in Gaza. That is the track record of the party that she's doing the dirty work for.
Absolutely. Well, I think it's time that we sort of turn the discussion toward, what is happening on the radical left? How is the radical left oriented to this? What is the politic behind Jill Stein's campaign? I know you were going to kick that off.
Sure. I think this position is I broadly agree with that camp, the no votes, which is symbolized by the no votes for genocide, with people supporting Jill Stein, other independent left candidates like the PSL and Cornel West. I broadly agree with that. I think the left needs to refuse to normalize or to offer any legitimacy to these two corrupt parties of big business. We need to encourage, not try to stamp out the spirit of revolt, which is being expressed in a small way in this election by people rejecting those options of Kamala Harris and Donald Trump and supporting Jill Stein. That's the spirit of revolt, which is the vital ingredient for any hope of progress. That's the necessary ingredient if we're gonna build a genuine left-wing movement that's fighting for radical change. Without that, we have no chance. And of raising people's horizons, not saying we need to settle for what's being offered by the capitalist system, but we need to assert our needs. So I totally stand with that camp in that spirit, and insist on, and also that camp it's saying honestly and openly that both obviously Trump, but also Biden and Kamala Harris and the Democratic Party, that they're complicit in this climate crisis, that they are also carrying out a brutal policy of repression and deportation and attacks on the rights of migrant workers who are being forced to flee and come to the United States, and pushing a racist agenda. And crucially, I think the strategic goal that the left needs to have is we need to build towards an independent, working class, anti-war political party. And votes for the largest possible protest vote in this election can be a step in that direction. But to win, the reality is that is a minority position on the left, unfortunately, today. I want to win more support for the perspective and ambition of an independent left working class political party. I want to win more support for that. To do that, it's necessary that we have effective tactics that take into account not the world the actual existing balance of forces of the world that we're dealing with, the actual terrain that we're operating on. And I don't think we do ourselves any favors. I don't think we advance that struggle if we close our eyes to the reality that Trump is a significant danger and is significantly greater evil compared to Harris. That does not mean that Harris represents us. That does not mean that Harris is on the side of working people. But we also do ourselves no favor to pretend that her and Trump are the same threat. And we also need a sense of proportion about the very weak, unfortunately, I would like it to be otherwise, but the very weak, undynamic character of Jill Stein's campaign and the even weaker character of the Cornel West and PSL campaigns. We need to take that into account in building the strongest possible protest vote for left politics in this election.
Well, let's bring in the discussion, the latest flare-up in this debate that has caught some media attention. There was a widely circulated clip of former Seattle City Council member Shan Fain speaking at a Jill Stein rally in Michigan, where, in the clip, obviously Swant said a lot more than this, but the clip that was circulated said, "We need to be clear about our goals. We are not in a position to win the White House, but we do have a real opportunity to win something historic. We could deny Kamala Harris the state of Michigan, and the polls show that most likely Harris cannot win the election without Michigan." So, what's been criticized here is Swant saying the goal is to defeat Harris and characterizing that as a historic win for the left. And obviously Stein and Swant's critics have seized on this clip to try and paint anyone on the left who dares to publicly question voting for Harris as just tools of the Trump campaign. A vote for Stein is a vote for Trump. This tired, lesser evilist logic. The Seattle Times ran a prominent attack piece against Shama, trying to shame anyone the stranger, anyone who'd ever supported Shama's politics as somehow complicit in the possibility of a new Trump administration. And we were both very active in Shama's campaigns. I was staff and part of leadership in the 2019 campaign. There's a lot. I'm absolutely proud of that record of the $15 minimum wage, tons of housing justice, tenant rights bills. So I'm absolutely against these attacks. But I do have a disagreement. I think our goal is not to defeat Harris. Our goal is to build the strongest possible support for independent working class politics in this election. Our goal is to make sure that on the other side of this election, whoever wins, that we can bring more people into our movement rather than allowing our critics, allowing our class enemies, allowing the labor liberals who are trying to isolate the left, allowing them to further alienate and drive a wedge between working class people and the left. And I think we have to be absolutely clear. It does matter who wins this election. Trump does represent a significantly greater threat to immigrants, to working class people. I don't think we need to spell that out very much to our audience. And the terrain of struggle for working class people under a Harris administration, it's not because Harris is going to be our friend, not at all, but the terrain of struggle for us to organize offensive struggles, to expand housing rights, to expand labor rights, to expand immigrant rights. There is a better terrain there to fight. And, failure to acknowledge that, framing our goal not of preparing the ground to build strong independent left politics, but rather framing it as defeating Harris, I think is just a big mistake that, hands our enemies an easy line of attack on a silver platter.
I think just to put a pin on it, I think we're fighting in the same strategic direction. We want the strongest independent left-wing protest vote in this election. The question here is, how do we get there? What's the best tactics? I think we have to recognize, I think we can be more effective. Jill Stein can get more votes if she was to acknowledge the obvious reality that left-wing workers and young people and activists are aware of, that Donald Trump, like you said, is a significant threat, and not try. I think she's making a tactical mistake presenting Trump and Harris on the same plane. They're equally as bad, or the other position of actually saying our priority is to defeat Harris. I think that's really taking things out of proportion. We can build more support for a left-wing protest vote if we acknowledge the real situation, but also say that the danger of Trump doesn't mean that we politically support the politics of Kamala Harris and the Democratic Party establishment. And under the conditions that we have, we can express that most clearly and help push the blackmail of lesser evilism to the side by saying in the 40 plus safe states where it's absolutely clear that Kamala Harris or Donald Trump will win, there's no reason at all for left-wing voters to give any support for Kamala Harris. In Texas, in Washington, where we live, in California, in New York, we should vote for Jill Stein and register the strongest left-wing protest vote. That's the vast majority of the country. But in the few swing states, 7 swing states across the country, if I was for socialists in Pennsylvania, in Wisconsin, and Arizona, I don't think we should endorse Kamala Harris. I don't think we should give her an ounce of political support. I don't think we should hide any of our political disagreements. We should openly criticize her. We should not donate to her. But in those swing states, to help, to be part of a common effort to block the greater danger of Donald Trump, I think where our votes matter in those swing states, socialists should vote for Kamala Harris without endorsing her, without political support, without covering up for her, but vote for her. I think that if Jill Stein was to adopt that position, I think she'd be in a stronger position, she'd be in a stronger ability to go on the offensive in Washington, in California, in 85% of the country where that's not the case, and say voting for me is not, I also want to see Trump defeated. It requires some nuance, and that's not popular today on the left. People want simple black and white answers. I do too. Unfortunately, the world is not simple and black and white. And in a complicated world, we need some nuance. And I think there's a difference between having political opposition with Kamala Harris and also tactically choosing how to cast our vote in the different situation. It's a different situation if you're for the left in Wisconsin than the left in California or New York or Washington State.
And I think, you brought up the term United Front. It's a classic sort of Marxist method. But how do we, I think that's a concrete example of how the left simultaneously joins forces with others who want to see Trump defeated, while at the same time, not for one moment hiding our political differences with Harris, with Democrats, with the union leaders, etc. And that looks like, yes, it's trying to say we are simultaneously trying to build the strongest possible independent left vote, while also saying, given the rigged character of our two-party system, given the rigged character of our electoral system, given the actual existing balance of class forces and the weakness of Stein's campaign in the left, that it's more power, we can actually win more support in working class communities if we can, not hand our enemies the easy dunk on the movement that, well, you're just going to facilitate Trump. And, so I think, to turn to kind of the final point is, what if DSA, if the left had adopted this point of this tactic over the last period, what could have been done? I mean, let's start with what is. Right now, unfortunately, DSA effectively has no position on the election. I mean, I think it's good that DSA voted to decline endorsing Harris. That's a significant step above most of the progressive left in this country of saying, we don't support either of these candidates. But, that there was no positive tactic developed in DSA. And, I want to be clear. I think, unfortunately, that's where we're at. DSA is a deeply divided organization. It's, has many strengths, but, it wasn't about to adopt this position. But if we had systematically over the last year been campaigning around the war, most DSA members have been out on demonstrations against the genocide in Gaza, right? Most DSA members have been active in fighting the Biden administration's policy of sending endless supplies of weapons and munitions and missiles to the Netanyahu regime. There's mass outrage about this on the left. And if DSA had connected that with saying, let's register the strongest possible protest vote in November against this, while simultaneously saying, and we're going to do that in a safe state strategy that is not going to risk the election of Donald Trump, I think that would have allowed DSA and the socialist movement and Stein's campaign, if she'd adopted that, a far greater audience. It would have made it far more difficult for our enemies, the Democratic Party corporate leadership, to undermine, isolate, and delegitimize the left. And it would have allowed DSA to be a factor in the debates over the last period. So I think it's unfortunate that the left is not very clear, not very coherent. I think the goal right now is to use the next few weeks, what we're hoping this discussion will contribute to, is to help educate people about what's possible. What is the vision for building a socialist movement that can be effective, that can win, that can avoid isolation in these inevitable debates that happen every election cycle? How do we advance our agenda and advance the idea of independent working class politics at this moment when millions and millions of working class people are paying attention?
What stands out to me is it's striking this time of amplified political discussion, how little the question of the war in Gaza and the expanding Netanyahu's rampage of trying to push the entire Middle East into an all-out war, how little that is really breaking through and being openly discussed and debated as part of the 2024 elections. And the way to do that is you do need for DSA not to be sidelined and the anti-war movement not to just be sidelined in silence during this time. It needs to be equipped with a positive tactic, with a clear position in the presidential election. And I think DSA and the socialist left and the anti-war movement would have been so much stronger to be able to assert and bring forward the question of cutting off U.S. military aid for the Israeli regime if we've been actively campaigning for Jill Stein, not to build the Green Party, to build DSA and anti-war activism, but to build in this election a kind of, just like we need to be able to protest in the street, build an electoral protest that we want millions of people to say, hell no, we are not going to vote for this party of U.S. imperialism, this party of right-wing attacks on immigrants, this party of big business, that we want millions of people to cast a protest vote and to raise more spirit of resistance, to harden a consciousness amongst activists and on the left and amongst progressive working people that the Democratic Party is not on our side. And be prepared in 2025, if Harris wins, to go into struggle immediately, not to be lulled to sleep like the message that Shan Fain is putting forward, that we can sit back and relax because we have a champion of our side in the White House, but to be ready to hit the streets in 2025, unlike what happened after Biden was elected and left energy and activism went down. I think DSA being equipped with that kind of message would have been in a much stronger position. And it would have been a revolution on the left of nuance, that you could have a position of refusing to endorse Kamala Harris, of refusing to give any political support for her, of openly raising her criticism, and recognizing there's a priority of blocking Trump, that DSA, without hiding its criticisms of Kamala Harris, will be part of a broader effort to defeat Trump, that we will encourage our members and activists to vote for the rotten, corrupt Kamala Harris in the 7 swing states. But in the vast majority, but we're not endorsing her, we're not hiding our differences, and in the vast majority of the country, we will be getting out the vote for a left-wing protest, and we're ready to wage struggle against the Democratic Party and its establishment, and hopefully in a more favorable situation in future elections.
Well, Philip, I think that's a good place to wrap it up. It's been a good discussion. Thanks for doing this again with me. Maybe we'll do more of these. And thank you all for listening.
It's been fun.